Live from our Liberty Harbor Academy studios, this is Girard at Large.
Your number one source for election coverage and analysis.
This is Girard at Large.
Good morning, Manchester, and to those of you in the surrounding towns, especially those towns covered by the District 9 State Senate seat. This is Girard at Large, and I am your really excited to be moderating this debate host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Our time is 7:04. Our station is 90.7 FM WLMW. You can find us on the web at girardatlarge.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, also at Girard at Large. We'll be taking your calls this hour if you have questions or comments for either Lee Nyquist, the Democrat from New Boston, town moderator there for some 20 years, and Andy Sanborn, Republican of Bedford, former District 7 state senator here in the state of New Hampshire. We'll also be taking your questions off of Facebook and Twitter, so if you follow us or you like us and you want to share your questions or thoughts, you are certainly welcome to be here. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here this morning on Girard at Large.
Thank you so much, Rich.
Rich, thanks so much for having us.
All right, that voice was Andy Sanborn. Andy, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself, who you are personally and professionally, so our audience gets a little feel for who you are. And then, Lee, we're going to allow you to do the same thing, and then we'll be into the debate.
Great.
Awesome. Rich, thanks so much for having us in today. Mike, everyone in the studio, you guys have been awesome in inviting us. And Mr. Nyquist, thanks so much for coming in. You know, as a fourth-generation New Hampshire native, as someone who's lived in the state his entire life, and as a small business owner, like so many people, I just got frustrated with how I felt our government was treating us. I think it's having a hard time listening to us. I think it's having a hard time respecting us, and it sure as heck isn't being real good with our money. So as a small business owner with a background in finance and economics, I made the decision to get involved politically in 2008 and became a state senator in 2010. You know, I'm a guy that has made a very strong pledge and decision to really focus on the fiscal challenges our state is facing today, trying to make our government smaller and more effective, and trying to make sure our government's being really good with your tax dollars.
All right. And currently you are a restaurant owner?
Yeah, I am. I own a restaurant up on Main Street in Concord, right across from the Capitol Center for the Arts. In fact, had Ron White in our restaurant last night for some great times, some drinks, and some fantastic chat.
Cool. That is Andy Sanborn. Lee Nyquist of New Boston, please take a moment to introduce yourself personally and professionally here to our audience.
Yes, thank you very much. And first, of course, Rich, I wanted to thank you for your family-oriented and community-oriented effort here for over the first year. I think it's admirable, and it's great to be back with both Mike Ball and I guess Dangerous Dave is
snapping some photos.
That's
yeah,
right.
I thought you had said buckle up earlier.
Yeah,
a fellow named Bill Wynn, who I think I saw before, but I can't put my finger on it. And so it's great to be here. But as you said, I have been a longtime resident of New Boston. Rich, like you, I've had 5 children. That's the most meaningful thing in my life. I've been very engaged in civic and charitable affairs as an elder of the Community Church of New Boston. I've had the pleasure of singing occasionally in the choir when I have the chance. Together with Ovid LaMontagne back in the 90s, I was a director of the Boy Scouts of America Daniel Webster Council, and it really goes on, and that's really who I am. Last February, I thought of some words that my late son, who had died in a tragic drowning accident when he was 15 back in 2004, had said to me. He said, Lee, he didn't say Lee, he said, Daddy, I think you're a man of action. And for a long time, I was really, I think, burdened by grief, as you might imagine, with that kind of an experience. But as the years went by and we had twins in 2007, Lincoln and Linnea, I wasn't happy with what was going on up in Concord. And I decided that perhaps I could see if my son's words were correct. So I became a man of action, and I think I've done a pretty good job in that respect with a proactive and campaign. I want to bring what I call moderation. I want the broad middle ground of our electorate, Rich, to be have an elected representative who will listen to them rather than having their own deep-seated opinions or agendas about issues. I want to go to work like a businessman goes to work, or any of us go to work in the morning, to reach a constructive result and not to pursue a preordained agenda. So at this point in my career, it would be my personal honor to have the chance to represent the folks from Bedford and New Boston and Mount Vernon and the other 11 towns in this district, and I look forward to having the opportunity to do so, and certainly look forward to the discourse here today.
All right, gentlemen, as you probably heard on the way in, we were talking about the recent allegations of voter fraud in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And as we know, voter identification laws here in New Hampshire and voter registration laws here in New Hampshire have been the subject of great discussion. Not too long ago, 2 weeks ago, in fact, we did an extensive interview with Secretary of State Bill Gardner and members of his legal team about the problems that the Stratford County Superior Court have caused the state by creating a domiciliary for voting purposes only. What should the law in the state of New Hampshire be when it comes to requiring people, when they register and when they vote, to prove who they are and to prove where they live? Why don't we start with you, Mr. Nyquist?
Yes, thank you, Rich. And as you mentioned, I have been the town moderator of New Boston now for over 20 years, and try to have a middle-of-the-road perspective on this. We have two very fundamental things at work here. One is the right to vote, and the fact that we should encourage everybody to have the right to vote.
Now, who has the right to vote?
Well, I'm starting out broadly, Rich. Mm-hmm. Every citizen, every person 18 and over. When I was in college, not in time for me, because I'm 60 years old now, but the voting age changed from 21 to 18. And frankly, probably created some of the discussion that we're going to be having today by doing that. But everybody over 18 has the unfettered right to vote. On the other hand, of equal value, Rich, is the integrity of the process. And that means just as much as the right to vote. In fact, it's intricately embedded with it. So we need to balance that. And I think, unlike, as I mentioned, I'm very much of a moderate Democrat, a fiscal conservative. I'm opposed to a sales and income tax. And I'm not like a Democrat on this voter ID issue either, at least what the stereotypical one is. I believe that the bill that passed should be given a chance. I had mentioned when I was on the show before that this issue of domiciliary and student ID and so forth was still something of concern in my mind, because I wanted to make sure that students had the chance to vote in an election, and the compromise needs to be made. Should
non-resident students be allowed to vote?
Well, that's the question. You have to determine what a non-resident student is, and I think that we're in a position now where the court has this under advisement. We'll be getting a decision on it by the state Supreme Court after the election. I think I said this before when I was in here, Rich. I very much want to see how our present bill, which I likely would have voted for, will work out in practice. And if it needs to be reformed in my mind because it's too much on the side of maybe, shall we say, the integrity of the process versus the right to vote, or the right to vote process versus integrity, then I'd be all ears about listening on that issue. So I'm very interested in this situation. I don't have an ideological viewpoint on it. I want to be as practical as I possibly can. I want to listen very carefully to Bill Gardner, who I have the greatest respect for, and I know that you had the chance to listen to him more recently than I did.
He was pretty unequivocal on the show. You might want to get that interview.
And, that's very important to me, what Bill Gardner has to say. And when I'm a state senator, what Bill Gardner has to say will be very, very important to me.
Senator Sanborn, you had an opportunity to vote on the bill that became law. What say you about the laws? And if you had your way, what would the requirements to register to vote and to actually cast your vote be?
Thanks, Rich. And I think this is one of the places where Attorney Nyquist and I actually disagree. First, because I like to answer the questions versus skate around it all morning long. I mean, the reality is we want people, I believe, and I think the voters of New Hampshire believe, that New Hampshire people should be voting on New Hampshire issues. It shouldn't be any more complicated than that, and I don't believe that it is. As I sat here, I still have never heard Attorney Nyquist say, as you asked the question so pointedly and might need to ask it again, do you believe that out-of-state college students should be voting? And for me, it isn't even just about out-of-state college students. I believe New Hampshire people should be voting on New Hampshire issues. We have two different ways to do that. Obviously, we have a voter ID registration process, and then we have a photo ID process to make sure they are who they say they are. I find it incredulous, frankly, to think that, if you're a college student from out of state getting tuition or scholarships from out of state that you should be able to vote here. I mean, if you're a New Hampshire resident, I guess that first threshold where you say what makes that process is, are they paying in-state tuition? And if they're not paying in-state tuition, I would question whether or not they're a voter here. So I'm pretty clear on it. I'm pretty equivocal on it. It's disappointing to me when we start talking about the concerns of voter fraud and voter ID that even yesterday on Fox News, the Democrat Party, again, as we see all the time, James O'Keefe came out with a video about a congressman's son coaching someone trying to commit voter fraud. I mean, it's on tape. It's on Fox this morning. It's disingenuous. It's an insult to the voters, and we need to be honest and clear with them. Let's make sure New Hampshire people vote on New Hampshire issues.
Let me put a fine point under this because Bill Gardner was unequivocal in what he thought the hazard to the state of New Hampshire was in the integrity of its elections by the action taken by Stratford County Court Judge John Lewis, which was to effectively create what's called a domiciliary for voting purposes only, which means New Hampshire does not have to be your home for any other reason than you want to vote here. And in fact, some of these students, none of the students have said they plan to stay in New Hampshire once they've graduated from college. Some of them have already voted in multiple elections. They admit they don't live here, but yet they say they have a right to vote here. Should New Hampshire be a state that allows anyone, student or otherwise, who simply wants to vote here, create a domiciliary just for voting purposes? Or should it be one man, one vote, one time, one place? Because there's nothing that prevents any of these people from voting in their home states either via an absentee ballot. Does New Hampshire have a responsibility to guarantee one vote, one time, one place? Or should people who have no intention of living here but want to vote here be allowed to vote?
Go ahead. I think what New Hampshire needs to do, one of the challenges we struggle with, because Bill Gardner and I worked very hard actually on the voter ID bill, is the definition of domicile versus resident versus inhabitant. It's throughout our RSAs, it's throughout our laws, and it's time for us to bring them all together and clearly define and bring them all into some alignment, and that's really going to help clear up our processes. But you're right, if you're in New Hampshire visiting and this is not your home, I think most people from the state would say that we love having you visit, we love having you be here, but that doesn't give you the right to vote.
Yes, Rich, I think that, again, I'm not going to apologize for wanting to take a very careful look at what has been passed. I think oftentimes on the campaign trail, and I respect that, people, from their point of view, because they have hard positions on the issues, which I respect and which I listen to carefully, try to put me in a box as a moderate. But I'm not going to sway from that. I'm going to carefully look, Rich, seriously, at the integrity of the process versus the right to vote. And Andy says that we have some very unfortunate discrepancies and contradictions in our state law and in our state constitution. He very well knows that. I very well know that. I want the people to understand that this is not a simple issue. And it's one that at this point in time, I'm not going to take a hard and fast position on until I've seen how it works in November, until I see how we can bring these various definitions into the proper context so that we can balance the right to vote and the integrity of the process. And I'm very confident that the majority of the people listening and in the state of New Hampshire would respect that kind of an attitude about this issue.
Girard Large, time is 7:22. We continue now with former State Senator Andy Sanborn, Republican of Bedford, and Town Moderator Lee Nyquist, Democrat of New Boston. The contestants in the District 9 State Senate race, which includes, of course, the towns of New Boston, Bedford, Mount Vernon, Fitzwilliam, Hancock, Richmond, Peterborough,
Lyndeborough, Troy, Sharon.
Oh, my gosh. They don't call that district the Snake for nothing.
Dublin and Troy, too.
Dublin and Troy. It goes all the way from the Manchester border to just south of Keene.
So in District 9, when you run for office, the biggest challenge is just remembering all the towns.
That's always, and as a state senator, I can tell you, if you walk into a committee hearing, there's this expectation that you call off your towns. Now, of course, Senator John Gallus, who was representing, I think, 58 or 59 towns, he was the only one that could get away with it. But for the rest of us, yeah, you have to come in and say what towns you represent. So you learn them early, and you need to be there and represent the people.
I was going to say the same thing, Rich. You'd be surprised how quickly you learn which ones they are. And this district is unusual, though, because it's only connected by Lineborough, and you can't really drive up over the Lineborough Mountains to stay in the district. So you're heading through Francistown, and
you have to leave the district to get to the district.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but that's fun too.
All right, so gentlemen, certainly one of the big issues in this campaign is the size and scope of government, budget, and taxes. We've seen a situation where the legislature has been criticized resoundingly by folks like Maggie Hassan, who's running for governor. She has criticized it severely for the spending cuts, calling it a Tea Party legislature, derisively calling it that. Where are you folks on the issues of spending and taxes? Is there more work that needs to be done? Is there more spending that needs to be done? And we're going to stake to the spending side of it, and then I'm going to ask you about the income taxes. I think, Lee, you started the last discussion, so Andy, I'm going to have you take up this one. You were part of that Tea Party legislature. Did the legislature go too far in restoring the budget, or should it have done something different?
Well, I mean, frankly, our government's become too big. It's become too broad. It's become too bold. Beyond any question, I think if you walked in the street and asked 100 people, you'd get 80, 90% of them that would say our government's not being good with our money. So there's two things we look at when we look at spending. Beyond question, we have to look at how do we prioritize the money and where is it going. But we have an obligation to the people of this state to make sure we're being frugal with their money, and that's one of the things I'm most proud on. When our legislature came together last time, in fact, when our society came together in 2010, and this is where Attorney Nyquist and I seem to differ. He resoundingly criticizes me regularly with this disdain about the Tea Party. Now, last time I checked, the Tea Party meant taxed enough already. So every time I hear Attorney Nyquist talk about, criticizing people who think we're being overtaxed, I'm not sure that is a moderate position. My parents, who are in their 80s, have never been political in their life. They showed up at rallies and said, look, I just can't afford these taxes and fees and increases that the Democrats have been throwing down on us for the past 4 years. It's just too much. So I believe our state budget should be smaller. As you see, the agencies, and I'm not sure if you've done something on your show on this yet or not, our agencies have just come out and said, we need to increase state spending by another 19%, almost $2 billion. Attorney Nyquist and I really differ on that. I don't think we need more spending. I think we need to be better with the money.
Lee.
Yes, thank you very much. I think when it comes to spending, Rich, we have to look at it much more macroeconomically. What I mean to say by that is that there are needs of citizens that need to be provided by government or charity or individuals at some level. So it's a question of allocation. Who's going to spend the money and how much? How much is the state going to take on as the responsibility? How much is the federal government monies coming down from above going to be helpful to the state in meeting these citizen obligations that all have to be paid for by somebody? As I said, either the federal government, the state government, the local government, or we as individuals. So I think that when you have just reductions in spending at the state level, it in no way reduces the tax obligations or the tax burdens on our citizens. What it does is downshift them either to the property taxpayer, and if the localities are unable to fund that because they already have borderline confiscatory property taxes, which many of them do, then the burdens fall back down on the individual citizens, such as dramatic increase in going to schools, community and technical colleges, for example, 27% cut that had to be paid by the community and technical students, reduction in the unique scholarship, $1,000 scholarship. These are obligations that have to be picked up either by those students or with their families. We had a downshifting of I think about $140 million. These numbers are always a little difficult to get a hand on in public education. It wasn't that the taxpayers of New Hampshire or the taxpayers of Bedford are going to be paying any less to pay their schools. It's just that they're going to be paying it through their property taxes. So that's what my concern is, and I want to make sure that we prioritize without having to raise taxes, the monies that we have, so that to the extent possible, the most important things that government has to do, and I think that public education is right at or near the top, are adequately funded by the state so that the towns and the citizens don't have to pick up the tab themselves.
Right. Your answer implies that you would have made different decisions in the legislature. And so does the criticism of your campaign of what the legislature did. So
that's correct.
With specificity, Lee, what would you have done differently? What would you have cut that wasn't cut? What would you have funded that wasn't funded to the level that you thought it should have been?
Well, again, I want to make sure that you understand that I'm a fiscal conservative. I've never met a tax that I like, so I wouldn't have been raising the taxes. I was not involved in the complex budgetary process, but I know that choices were made to not fund public education for the benefit of other things in the budget. For example, the bills which gave tax credits to businesses for giving money to private and religious schools. That certainly didn't need to be done. That money could have either remained in the business enterprise tax or business profits tax, or it could have earmarked those scholarships for our public school system, thereby boosting by many millions of dollars the amount of money for public schools.
There's a $3.2 million cap on the amount
That's
of
right.
credits.
But it's money, and it's important, and it reflects an attitude, too, about how the legislature feels about public versus private or religious education and the public's role.
And those scholarships could be used for out-of-district public school placements, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So it wasn't entirely just for private or
but that was the primary
schools.
focus, as you know. There's no question about that. I also thought that the cut in the tobacco tax was uncalled for, and Andy has even said at a forum that we had that it was an experiment that didn't work, and he's in favor of it sunsetting. Respectfully, I said to him I didn't think I could let him up that easily. I thought it was a bad idea at the time. I think that the prognosticators said it was a bad idea at the time, and it's anywhere from a $34 to a $40 million shortfall that we have experienced because of that cut. I think it's about $17 million a year.
Right. Let me get Senator Sanborn in on this. There's a lot there for you to respond to, Senator, so I'm going to let you have at it.
Well, thanks. You know, it since we're so close to Halloween, I'd say it shivers down my spine every time I hear liberal Democrats talk about adequacy of funding something. You know, we've seen the adequacy of funding from the Democrats over the past 4 years when they've increased taxes on you by almost $400 million. And ladies and gentlemen, that's direct taxes on you. Attorney Nyquist is still having a hard time pledging to you as you're listening out there this morning whether or not he's going to raise or lower your taxes. He continues to talk about our need to spend more money, to spend more money in education, to spend more money on making government bigger. And when we were just talking about the spending question, Rich, that you asked earlier, he never once said we need to make sure our agencies are being efficient with the money, that they're spending it wisely. It was always that they need more. And I think this is a real driving difference between the two of us. You know, as chair of the New Hampshire DES board that both Lee and I sat on, and he's the chair of it, in a forum a couple weeks ago, he was celebrating the fact that he oversaw a 300% increase on businesses and said this is something businesses wanted. Now, as a small business owner that works for a living, I can tell you, when Mr. Nyquist, as chair of that committee, saw my taxes go up 300%, I wasn't celebrating. I was trying to figure out how to get the money for it. So when we talk about spending, there is a role of government, and I think, and we all agree with that. And there are things we should be spending money on, but we need to make sure that the money is being spent wisely, that we're being frugal with it. And the answer to every question from the Democrat side is not, let's raise more taxes. And that seems to be the only way they want to look at this. You know, specifically as we talk about Senate Bill 372, again, I'm discouraged when I hear Attorney Nyquist talk about the fact that he doesn't believe people who are struggling financially have a right to an education. I'm just, at my core, it's so wrong. I'm a huge believer in education. I'm on the board of the President's Advisory Board at New England College. I'm on the Dean's Advisory Board at UNH School of Law. My father and my sister are teachers. Huge believer. But I'm a huge believer that every child doesn't fit into every single bucket, and that parents deserve the right. Parents deserve the right to find the best education for their kid. Now, Senate Bill 372 specifically did that. It doesn't take any tax dollars, and maybe it's because, again, Attorney Nyquist is always looking to find more places to tax and bring it into the government. But this is a system set up that we're using today in other parts of our state, that 18 other states in New Hampshire do, which provides a way for those families who don't have a lot of money to get a great education for their kid. And I don't know how anyone could be against that.
Gentlemen, I want to switch gears in this segment so we can get to the question of an income tax. You both say you oppose an income tax here in the state of New Hampshire or a sales tax, yet one of you has taken the pledge on an income tax and the other of you has not. Senator Sanborn, you have taken the pledge against a broad-based sales or income tax. Do you support the constitutional amendment that is on the ballot that would prohibit the imposition of a statewide income tax? And I guess I'll leave the question there.
It's pretty wide open, and again, this is somewhere else where Attorney Nyquist and I disagree. And when he continues to contend he's a moderate, I think most people, in fact, I think the numbers are 60 or 70% of the people of this state don't want an income tax. Now, it's one thing for Attorney Nyquist to say, I make a pledge that I won't support a sales or an income tax, but he's an attorney. When's the last time you went to your attorney and you said, hey, just let me tell you about it, and we're not going to write it down or sign a contract? That's what his profession's all about. It's enforcing contracts. When you sign a pledge, it's making a contract with the people of New Hampshire. I don't support an income tax. I don't support a sales tax. I proudly signed it, and I call on Attorney Nyquist. If he means what he says, and this is where the rubber hits the road at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything if you're not willing to stand up behind it. And if you stand up behind it, you'll sign the pledge.
Mr. Nyquist, you have the last word on this one before we hit our break.
Right. I have said on innumerable occasions, publicly, privately, and unequivocally, and I state to the voters of Bedford, New Boston, Mount Vernon, and the voters of the district and the state that I am unequivocally opposed to a sales and income tax, and I pledge to those voters and taxpayers that I will not vote for a sales or income tax or a broad-based tax.
So why not sign the pledge?
I have not been presented a pledge to the citizens of these towns. What you and Andy are talking about are pledges to third parties. I don't, as a moderate and as a person of goodwill and good faith, I don't pledge to interest groups. I don't pledge in signature to organizations. For example, Grover Nyquist on the federal level. I pledge to the voters. And I would be happy to sign a pledge to the voters, as I just stated, at any time. But I don't think that people are looking for signed, sealed, and delivered pledges to an interest group on the side. They're interested in what it is that I'm going to do as a thinking representative of the people. And as a thinking representative of the people, I pledge to them that I will not be voting for a broad-based tax, that I am unequivocally opposed to it. I have never met a tax that I like, and I like these less than any.
Our large time is 7:41. We continue now with former District 7 State Senator Andy Sanborn. He's a Republican from the town of Bedford, seeking the District 9 Senate seat vacated by Ray White. Joining us also is Lee Nyquist. He's a Democrat from New Boston, the town moderator for many years. As we continue our debate here in what is one of the most closely watched, hardest fought, and most hotly contested state Senate races in all of New Hampshire. Gentlemen, we've talked about voter identification, we've talked about budget and taxes, and now we're going to get on to, I think, what the other bread and butter issue here is, and that is the budget, not the budget, but jobs in the economy. Clearly, Charlie Sherman, who's the executive director of New Horizons for New Hampshire, was with us yesterday. And one would think that the state of New Hampshire, with its 5.7% unemployment rate, was doing relatively well. But this year over last year, Charlie has seen a 30% increase in the number of people who are going to his organization. The other night, they served 290 people in the soup kitchen. And they are over capacity in the shelter. And some 900 families a month now are coming to their food pantry, which they can no longer keep stocked for food. Clearly, there are issues in the economy here. in the state of New Hampshire. By the way, newhorizonsfornh.org if you want to learn how you can help. Lee, we'll start with you because Andy got the first question last time. What specifically needs to be done to facilitate greater economic growth and development here in the state of New Hampshire? What will you do as senator?
Well, I think that we do need to encourage the growth of small businesses and their ability to grow and get credit from the banks and allow the banks to be able to make the credit to the small businesses for the kind of growth that we need. I am an optimist that particularly after November 6th, maybe in the lame duck session, regardless of what happens in Washington, that we will have some movement toward a compromise on the so-called grand compromise to reduce federal spending that we were unable to have a couple of years ago, and that will create stability in the expectations in the national market, and that will be very important because we need an understanding for small businesses and banks, regardless of what that understanding is, that there's some certainty as to what the year 2013 is going to be. One of the certainties that I think Andy and I are very much in agreement on is that there will be no sales and no income tax, and I think both of the gubernatorial candidates believe in that. We're not going to make that kind of a change under this somewhat fragile economy. I also think that we should partner small businesses with our universities, our high schools, and our technical colleges, particularly the technical community colleges and institutions like the marvelous Manchester School of Technology, which I know you're very familiar with, where the people who are going to be the backbone of our trades and our services in the future at an early age, now all the way back to the 9th grade at the Manchester School of Technology, as you probably know, that business is able to partner with them and form relationships and be in those schools and be in the technical schools, and that there be tax credits for research and development and creative ideas, that we listen to what the ideas of small business are, try to identify the ones that we can live with, that are going to be the best ones to move our economy forward. And as Andy said, as the chair of the Unemployment Compensation Advisory Council, this has been my role for 7 years, to bring members of business and labor together to move our economy ahead. And I think that we've been successful in many respects. New Hampshire Works, I think, is something that you're very familiar with, that we were involved in. And I would look forward to this kind of a partnership between small business and our universities, as well as government being a partner. I do not believe that government is an enemy. I do not believe that it should be a regulator or an intervener, but I do believe that we should allow it to be a constructive partner and work in a triad of business, education, and government, all together, all working for the same goal, to raise all ships in the sea that we have.
All right, Senator Sanborn, what specifically would you do if you were reelected to the Senate to improve the economic environment here in the state of New Hampshire?
Thanks, Rich. As a small business owner, I know every single day where our struggles are. We don't need to talk in hyperbole and come up with non-answers to these questions. Our government is taxing us too much. Our government is over-regulating us. We have a cultural change that's happened in the past 5 or 6 years that most of us believe government is there to make sure there's a level playing field, and then we can work on the policy of how close or how far from the fire we have. But today, when our government's become so big and so broad that I've got business associates that, constituents of ours, that have 17 different regulatory authorities overseeing their small business that barely does $1 million a year, that hurts job creation. When you're spending all of your time trying to deal with a government that doesn't understand your business, that doesn't understand how to make business grow. Because for me personally, government doesn't create jobs. The business community does. And that's, again, where Attorney Nyquist and I have a difference. We can create jobs, we can grow, and we can expand. And at this point, it's our government which is holding us back by making sure everyone has a job. This isn't rocket science, it's economics. We need to let the business community actually make that happen. And again, I continue to be so concerned when I hear Attorney Nyquist say things like, we don't need a sales or income tax today. That's where I want to see him sign that pledge, because just like his running mate, Maggie Hassan, introduced an income tax and supported it, but today she doesn't support it. And it will destroy our economy if we allow these people who want to raise our taxes and want to raise fees and fines and penalties to get into office and really stop what our potential is to do the great work we've been doing in the past couple of years. As a state senator, I've worked on both sides of the aisle with John Lynch to create efficiencies, to modernize our government. I've got one plan itself which will increase government service and save $300 million. Now, that's the types of reforms we really should be talking about. We've pushed back on 80 or 90 different regulations. We've cut 20 or 30 different taxes and fees, and that's the type of stuff we need to do to make sure everyone has a job.
One of the things that you touched on were regulations. You both kind of mentioned that. Right now, the departments in the state of New Hampshire have virtually unfettered rulemaking authority. Once the legislature passes a law, you really leave it to the departments in the state to fill in the blanks. Should it be that way, or should the legislature either be more specific in the bills that it passes, or should it assert itself and take oversight over the regulations propagated by the departments, Senator?
In New Hampshire, because we're a citizens legislature, we're not doing what I personally believe is the people's work when it comes to creating laws. If you look at other states, even Massachusetts, right to ourselves, we pass laws today which are essentially large global concepts. And then you're right, Rich, we send it to another committee and they formulate with the agencies the rules. And that's where we've gotten into so much of our trouble, because we're allowing the agencies to increase fees and fines and penalties, and there's no oversight.
Oh, not to mention give themselves something to do. That's called job security.
There's always that too. I put a piece of legislation in that we're still working on to actually bring that back to the legislature, because I believe your elected official should be the person voting to raise costs on you as an individual or your business. So I believe we should eliminate jail car. We should include all of the rulemaking processes into the piece of legislation. And I believe that legislators should be voting to increase or decrease your taxes, because, as you know, I support cutting your taxes.
Lee, what say you? Should the department's rulemaking authority be subject to the approval of the legislature?
Well, I think that, as Andy pointed out, the important place is at the beginning of the process, that the legislature in the proposed bills and in the ultimately passed RSAs expresses firmly, concisely, and comprehensively what its intent is and what the scope of regulatory authority ought to be. Certainly the executive bodies have some discretion in this area, but it is not something that should be abandoned by the legislature, as perhaps it has been over the years. I would favor an increased legislative activity in that area for sure. I also think that the idea of comprehensively looking at all of the regulations that we have to see what their impact is, not only on small business, but on the taxpayers and all forms of government, is a very, very constructive one, and ultimately one that could spur economic growth in the small business sector in particular. Now, I would like the opportunity to say, and again, respectfully, Andy, that occasionally, at least, I hear you saying certain things about me that are really for the stereotypical Democrat. I think that Andy wants to run against a stereotypical liberal Democrat, a tax and spend Democrat, a person who is in favor of broad-based taxes, a person who is in favor of increasing burdens on small businesses, a person who is proposing increasing fines and penalties and assessments. Either fortunately or unfortunately, he's not running against that person. He's running against a person named Lee Nyquist, who is sitting here before you and discussing these issues with you directly, and who is a middle-of-the-ground individual who listens carefully to the conservative point of view and who listens also to the points of view of others. Not somebody who has a preordained agenda who comes in, but somebody who wants to improve the economy of the state of New Hampshire from the ground up in a collaborative fashion, George Kapatis, a great Manchester individual. He's now the head of Department of Employment Security, has been Department of Labor, Workforce Opportunity. He is Mr. Glendy in Manchester. He is Mr. St. George's Cathedral. His dad, Nick, and his whole family. This is the essence of what Manchester and the New Hampshire community is about. And when he takes a look at these issues of jobs and the economy, and he'll say it every time, he asks one question. It's a compound question, but it's important. He said, is it good for the worker, and is it good for business? And is it good for business? A conjunctive. And I can't think of a better rule for any of us to pursue to be able to move our state ahead of the jobs and the economy to where we want it to be. Because when we say we built it, yes, we all built it. The small entrepreneur and the working man, and yes, in partnership, at least on occasion, in a constructive fashion with government. We all built it, Rich, and I want to be part of that broad we.
Lee, that sounds like what amounts to your closing statement, and will have to be because the last minute and a half we have for Senator Sanborn. Believe it or not, we're out of time.
So
Andy,
I don't interrupt him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee. I
you get to close us out.
Although my jaw just came off the ground when I hear Lee Nyquist say, "Government helped build it. We built it. Government didn't build our businesses, ladies and gentlemen. That is not the role of government." I'm stunned when he wants to pass himself off as a moderate Democrat, but he takes the same words that Barack Obama uses all the time, saying that the only reason you have a business is because government built it. I'm offended, I'm hurt, and I'm honestly startled by it that you would say that. It's not government's role to do that, Lee. It's the business community's role. We can't improve our economy by raising taxes. We can't improve our economy by making a larger, more restrictive government on a regular basis. And that really is one of the fundamental differences between us. For me, I'm proud to have the support of Ovid Lamontagne. I'm proud to have the support and endorsement of Kelly Ayotte and Ray Resort and Frank Ginta and Charlie Bass and the entire Senate team, because they know the amount of work I've done to focus. And I've been very clear as a state senator. I promised to show up and focus and vote on the economic issues that are confronting us. I promise to show up and work so hard to try and reduce regulation, to try and reduce taxes so we can get our economy running. Charlie Sherman and I are close personal friends. We've known each other for 30 years, and I see the struggles that he has over there. We hear numbers and we hear statistics on a regular basis about the economy. And I'm here to tell you, I stand in a business every single night. I actually still work for a living. I'm proud that I do. Our economy is struggling. People don't have a lot of money. The underemployment in our state is just staggering. And we need to come together and elect people to the legislature who understand how to create jobs, who understand how to make a smaller, more efficient government that begins to respect the people. I believe I'm that guy. My name is Andy Sanborn. I've gone up there and fought for you for the past 2 years. I'd love to go up there and fight for you for the next 2 years. So please come out and vote November 6th. And Rich and you guys at the station, we truly appreciate all your time.
Thank you for your time. Andy Sanborn, running as a Republican from Bedford for the District 9 State Senate seat. Lee Nyquist, running as a Democrat from New Boston for that same seat. Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your time with us and our audience here on Girard at Large.
WLMW 90.7 FM.
It's uplifting and powerful, and it's a good message all around.
New Hampshire Family Radio.
It's just a good station to listen to.
Hi, this is Rich Girard. As you know, our mission here at Girard at Large is to connect local people, places, and things by bringing you news from our own backyard. Did you know that GoffstownToday.com has a similar mission? So when we want to know what's happening in Goffstown, Ware, Dunbarton, or New Boston, we go to GoffstownToday.com.
Hi, this is Bill Wynn, publisher at GoffstownToday.com. If it's happening in Goffstown, Ware, Dunbarton, or New Boston, even in Pinardville, you can find out about it on GoffstownToday.com. If we know about it, you should too.